Hey, this is James Arnold Taylor, voice actor, the voice of
Yabba Dabba Doo, Fred Flintstone.
Johnny Test, who's 11 years old and totally awesome.
Ratchet from Ratchet and Clank, Tidus from Final Fantasy X. Oh, yes, and of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi. It wouldn't be Coffee with Kenobi without yours truly. The force is strong here indeed.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. I am your host, Dan Zehr, delighted to talk Star Wars with you. Ever since May of 2013, I want to provide a positive, family-friendly, spoiler-free place to discuss this galaxy far, far away. Imagine walking into your favorite coffee shop and hearing a discussion of Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action, animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars experiences at the Disney theme parks. I want to share that experience here on this podcast, weekly interactive live video every Tuesday night, my website, special events, email newsletter, and more. Find out more and join our Star Wars community at coffeewithkenobi.com. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zehr sent you. On today's show, Megan Crouse and Amy Richau join us to talk about the Star Wars The High Republic Character Encyclopedia. This is the first of two Coffee with Kenobi shows. For the rest of the week, we will certainly be talking about the Bad Batch episode, The Return, this weekend, but I wanted to get this interview out. It has got some great insights into the world of the High Republic and two wonderful people to talk about it with. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. I suppose I should mention that there was a bit of a scheduling conflict with all of us because there's a lot of things to juggle naturally when you're scheduling an interview. So fortunately, I was still able to talk to both of them. First, we're going to talk with Megan, and then after the break, Amy Richau will join us. Here we go. Joining us today for a cup of coffee, this is going to be really exciting for me because we have a huge thrill. She is not new to Star Wars. She's certainly not new to writing. But this is her first official Star Wars book. I am talking about Megan Crouse, the co-author of the High Republic Character Encyclopedia. Megan, welcome back to the show. It's been a long time.
Thank you. Yeah, this is we have talked before, and I've been on this show as a fan before, and this is the first podcast I'm doing for this book. So I think it's excellent symmetry that it
cool.
is this podcast.
I'm so happy. That's so. Oh, that makes me really happy. I mean, you can see I'm smiling. People listening can't see, but I promise I am. So, what is it about the High Republic that is so meaningful and impactful to you?
So the High Republic is an era of great diversity and great potential. So each Jedi is encouraged to feel the Force in a distinct way, right? So you have like Avar, who can hear the Force as music. You have like custom combat styles like Solandra Show's shield. Then there's the two enemy factions, right? The ones that are there are more than two, but the two that are most interesting to me are the Path of the Open Hand and the Nameless, which reject and negate the Force, respectively. And those competing attitudes for the Force are really narratively rich, I think, and lend themselves to a lot of fun world building around the Force. It's a great era for fans of the Jedi and fans of the Force, even though the Sith are not really on the scene.
That's true. So I've got a long list of questions for the book, of course, which we will talk about. But I have to ask you, being a longtime fan and someone who's just loved this franchise and this fandom, I love these kind of stories. Tell me about when you first found out you were going to be writing a Star Wars book.
So I had wanted to take this next step into doing books. I had written for Star Wars Insider. I wrote for StarWars.com. Amy and Dan, you yourself know, like, this is these type of books are like such an interesting way to kind of get involved in the canon. So, and then that editor basically asked me, and this is all leading up to how I felt, because like the specific circumstance, right? Asked me like, are you familiar with the High Republic? And immediately I was like, I am so familiar with the High Republic because I had been writing about it for official material and for Den of Geek for quite a while. And I was like, and honestly, my first feelings were like excitement and gratitude, and also just like, all right, I have to study. I have to make sure that if I'm not up to date already, and I had made charts already, I was pretty up to date. I was like, okay, the answer to this question has to be yes, right? So
Yes.
I was able to like, yes, yep, I'm caught up. And then it kind of went on from there. And so the feeling was one of like great excitement and great gratitude, but also this feeling of like the plan falling into place. Like this, I did this on purpose, you know?
The force wills it, right? And it all works out. And so you find out, and then it's time. And so, as you said, you love it, and you love the series, the era of Star Wars that is the High Republic, 200 years before the Phantom Menace. So you've got a lot of great challenges, but I'm just curious for you, who are some of your favorite characters in the High Republic?
So, as a fan, I was immediately attached to some of the villains. So, and that's to say, let me reverse this real quick. Immediately, I was attached to Avar, Stellan, and Elzar, who are heroes in Phase 1. But I tend to like villains. You can see the various Darth Maul action figures behind me. There's a Moff Gideon over there. So as the time went on, I got really attached to the villains, especially in Phase 2. So Marta, Ro, the Mother, and the Herald. And then Aslan, who's like a little bit of a hero and a little bit of a villain.
What are your thoughts on Marchion Ro?
So I think Marchion and the Nihil are cool characters. Marchion is so chaotic. I gotta say though, he's not necessarily one of my personal favorites. Nothing wrong with him. The Nihil, just there are so many other cool factions in the High Republic. The Nihil just like weren't my favorite.
Right. If I had to pick a favorite Nihil, it would be Lorna D. I really liked Lorna D.
I love Lorna D. And talk about chaos, right? She really shows that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in your opinion, and I know you're a big fan of the prequel era too, do you think that some of the flaws of the Jedi Order in the prequel era are present in the era of the High Republic as well?
So I'm actually relatively optimistic about the Jedi Order as an organization. And there are a couple of reasons for that, some of which are more like Doyleist, some of which are more Watsonian. Like, is the Jedi Order good for the narrative versus is the Jedi Order good for the galaxy? But something that I like about the High Republic in particular, and specifically Daniel Jose Older's comics, is that the Jedi are portrayed as this really positive, unconventional family unit where people have fun. There are like foot races, there are bake-offs. We get a character called Zine, whose story is in a lot of ways an exact inverse of how the Jedi Order treated Anakin Skywalker. So, and these Jedi are a lot more willing than the prequel Jedi to let individuals leave the Order to find their own paths in different ways. So the Republic, I think it would be really interesting to talk about the flaws of the Republic and how similar those are to the prequel era. But for narrative purposes, both the Jedi and the Republic are much more reliable institutions in the High Republic era.
Yes, and for the record, I've always found the idea of the flawed Jedi Order and its blah blah, and I've always kind of bristled at that critique of them. I mean, I think that's a little too simplistic. I think there's so much more that goes into the fall of the Jedi, and a guy named Palpatine has a lot to do with that. But we're not talking about Palpatine. He does not exist in the High Republic, but the Nihil do. For you, what makes the Nihil so terrifying?
So this goes back to the chaos, right? What's most frightening to me is that they don't really have long-term goals. Marchion Ro wants to lash out, and he wants basically to be entertained. And there are reasons that he wants that. He has a history, he has motivations. He's not a character kind of like born of nothing who is totally, as the name suggests, nihilistic. He has reasons for what he does, but he's not really interested in those reasons himself. And that makes him and the people around him really unpredictable.
And why would anyone sign up? I guess fear has there's all kinds of unique reasons. It's challenging, it's daunting, and speaking of daunting, when you think about phases 1 and 2 of the High Republic, because phase 3 is just kind of slowly evolving, so it's hard to really talk about that now. But in phases 1 and 2, what are some of the more daunting sections to write about in the High Republic character encyclopedia?
So I hadn't read a lot of the comics before I started working on this. I was a fan of the books. I was reading and reviewing the books, but the comics hadn't grabbed me as much. So I needed to do a crash course on what was going on with characters like Zehr and Kiev. And so just catching up on all that very quickly was daunting. Then there were the timelines, which if you look in the front of the book, there's a couple timelines. I was responsible for the phase 2 timeline. These were fun and also challenging because like the Battle of Dalna in particular has a lot of moving parts. It happens at the same time as yet another round of tensions between the planets Iriam and Arono, and the individual battles span multiple timeline entries. So doing them, making sure those were in order was definitely daunting. And then finally, this one I think is kind of funny, but the nameless control rods, right? In order to make sure I understood how many control rods were and what they did, I scoured the books and then read the notes I'd taken out loud to my housemate to make sure they made sense to someone other than me.
No, believe me, I get it, because there's a lot of nuance that goes into a lot of these books, and I know I understand exactly what you're saying.
You probably know this feeling of with that in particular, the control rods. I was like, somebody has to have written out a very clear description of this, and then had this dawning moment of oh no, it's me. I have to write the very clear description.
It's kind of exciting, isn't it? It's sort of a wonderful opportunity. Well, are there certain characters that you really, really like? And then maybe it wasn't daunting to write about them, but you're just kind of wow, I've got so much power. I really want to represent this person. Okay, time to do it.
Yes. That was the path of the open hand for me. I was very
good choice.
Look, the path, they're not good people. They do not do good things. I was really I like them though. And getting to write about the Herald and some of the annotations. So we could get a little creative in annotations, and I was able to add some details to him in particular that just made me kind of giggle.
That's really fun. What aspect of the High Republic, whether it's characters, storylines, or events, did you learn to appreciate or understand more while writing and reflecting upon the book?
It's got to be the comics. That's especially a couple different storylines that are basically comics only. Aslan is a character who I first met in Encyclopedia related material as opposed to as a fan. So I will kind of always associate him with this book. His story with Arkoff in particular and the manga really informs what's going on in the Shadows of Starlight comic right now. So I got to understand and appreciate the comic storylines a lot more.
Oh, that's cool. And isn't it fun to kind of, when you're reading, you're not only reading for fun, but you're reading for purpose, and then it kind of takes on a new life, doesn't it?
It does, and it helps that things are very accessible.
How would you compare writing the High Republic Character Encyclopedia to StarWars.com, Den of Geek, Insider? I mean, they're all different kind of mediums, I suppose, but how would you compare writing this book to other projects you've worked on?
This was very different. As my first official encyclopedia project, I would say it was almost incomparable. I had done articles in Star Wars Insider, which are somewhat similar. I have a guide to various main clone troopers, which involved entries that focused very closely on individual characters and were pretty short entries for each character. So that I was able to practice doing that and doing articles on the High Republic explaining things about it on StarWars.com. But the encyclopedia was much larger. It involves working with the co-author. It involves editors and layout.
It's so exciting for me. And we talked a little bit before we turn on the recording aspect of our conversation. I'm not at all surprised that you are working in this avenue, because it was just a matter of time. So I just want to say, as a side note, congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
Star Wars: The High Republic Character Encyclopedia. When did it come out officially?
Early December. I believe it was the 5th.
That sounds right. I couldn't remember if it was that week or the week after. So it's super fun. Did you go into a bookstore and see it on shelves?
Yes, I went into my local Barnes and Noble.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been very cool. I think I went into the mall bookstore and like moved it, like put it face out when it shouldn't have. I made sure it wasn't covering anybody I knew.
Sure.
But just put it face out.
I think that's great. Oh, it makes me so happy. This is so fun. And I did the same thing. Even if it wasn't a book that I wrote, but it was a book I liked, and you were in a bookstore and you kind of position it so it comes a little bit out, because you never know what's going to catch somebody's eye. And it's just funny. We love writing, right? We love the craft of writing. Certainly we love Star Wars, but there's something really wonderful about the act of putting words onto when you're typing or that you're handwriting or whatever. There's just a certain responsibility and a power to that I just find continually refreshing. I'm sure you probably feel the same way.
Absolutely. I think that talking about the responsibility, I feel great responsibility when I do work like this. The other thing I'll say about the act of writing is that sometimes you need to get the cat out of the way of the keyboard, and that part is also very meaningful and important and must be handled delicately.
Right. And that could be metaphorical or literal in this case. So what are you able to share that you have coming out in the future?
As of now, the Encyclopedia is my project, and if other things happen, you'll be able to see them. My social media, so I'm at Full of Words on Bluesky. That's where any updates go. But for now, what I have coming out is the High Republic Character Encyclopedia.
And be sure that you run out, if you haven't already, and go to your local Barnes & Noble or bookstore, or order on Amazon or anywhere fine books are sold. Megan, thank you again so much for coming back to Coffee with Kenobi. We'll have to make sure it doesn't take so long to get you back on the next time.
Thank you so much, Dan.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
We are back, and we are now here with the other author of Star Wars: The High Republic Character Encyclopedia. She is a longtime friend of the show and a dear friend of mine. I've had the good fortune of writing a couple of Star Wars books with her, including the upcoming, which we can finally talk about, Star Wars Character Encyclopedia, the one and only Amy Richau. Amy, welcome back to Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you for having me back. And thank you for, rescheduling with me when I was sick all of January.
Yes, well, you are worth the wait, my friend. I'm very excited about this. This first one especially. I was at Star Wars Celebration London, as were you. And I'm in the Star Wars publishing panel, and I look up, and Charles Soule is sharing a panel with you. And then he mentions how excited he was to use your book, The High Republic Character Encyclopedia. What was that experience like for you?
Well, being, Celebration is obviously like just an amazing experience just to attend, in any capacity. Like, it's just so great to be around so many Star Wars fans. I had attended the Lucasfilm publishing panel as, in the audience for the last, 2 years. In Anaheim, I was on a nonfiction publishing panel, but this year there wasn't that. And there was just like one that had kind of a mix. And it's just, it felt like a big deal. Like, I was very nervous. I was just like, wait a minute, like, these are like New York Times bestselling people. Like, and then there's me, it definitely, felt a little bit, weird, but the crowd was amazing. And, the timing of it could not have been better for me, because I got to talk about Star Wars timelines, and I got to talk about Star Wars: The High Republic. And I, there were a lot of timeline nerds and High Republic fans in that room. Like there's a bit of crossover in that kind of, geekdom. And it's always really, really great to hear a creator say that they use your book. I mean, it's a reference book. It's supposed to be used as a reference. And I certainly use Star Wars timelines all the time on projects that I'm, working on. But it's amazing to hear other authors, and especially with Charles and Kevin was on that panel too, they created these characters, and, Megan and I were trying to explain who these characters are and why they're cool and what you should know about them in such a brief way, which seems to be a disservice to practically every single one of the characters because they're so great as characters. It's just that, that was just challenging. But anytime, the timelines authors, we occasionally get a group email from someone who is blah, 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 held up your book, at a meeting and said everyone should buy it. And that's really, really great. I mean, I think that my personal favorite is seeing fans, they're posting pictures in their, from their, bookshelves and stuff like that. But, anytime the book escapes my mind and actually ends up in someone's hands and is useful is amazing.
And I think I love everything about that. And I think one thing that makes it extra special, at least, you and I have seen Charles at several things before, talked to him, in passing or what have you. He doesn't just doll out compliments or accolades. And the fact that he said that, I will never forget your face because you were so composed, but so overjoyed. And I don't blame you. I was happy I got to see that live. That was fun. Yeah.
I will tell you that I feel like I don't remember anything that I said or anything that was said on that panel. What I remember is being backstage and I was like, wait a minute, they're announcing our names? We're not just walking out there? And I think I panicked at that moment and blacked out and then it was over.
You were a champ for sure. Let's talk about the High Republic. I know you're a big fan of these books. What is it about the High Republic that is so meaningful and impactful to you?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it's such a complicated answer too, because number one, it's a new era in Star Wars. Wow. That's crazy. To be, involved in this whole new kind of storytelling environment. Star Wars publishing has always been a part of my fandom since I was a kid. And I was reading the Planet of the Hoojibs, you ding, you turn the page when you hear the, R2-D2. Star Wars books have always been important to me. And so the fact that this was a publishing first initiative, I thought was really, really great. The fact that it brought in comics and audio dramas and had all of this stuff going on, I thought was really exciting. I think that the most meaningful thing for me, though, is seeing how many people the High Republic is their Star Wars. Mm-hmm. It's their entry point, or it's what reignited their love for Star Wars. And how it really, and especially with younger fans, I love talking to Star Wars fans that are younger than me, which is progressively more and more Star Wars fans. But I think that that's what's really important to me is it really seems like it's this new era. And to be asked to play a very, very small part of it was really pretty much the biggest compliment I think I've ever received.
I was glad that you were one of the writers on this because I knew that you, just even before this was a twinkle in your eye, I knew how much you loved these characters. And speaking of these characters, I realize I should probably apologize because this is not a fair question. But who are some of your favorite characters in the High Republic?
Well, I think from phase one, I think if I had to pick, I'm not going to just pick one, but I'm Keeve and Vernestra are the ones that I'm kind of the most excited to follow. And I'm most excited to know about, what's going to happen to them. I love the Wayseekers in general. And so Orla and then going to phase two, Gela, I really they really kind of spoke to me. I love Gela and Axel in general. In phase two, their story, I thought that was really, really fun. And I really, really something I really liked about this character encyclopedia is I love how many characters are given a lot of weight in the story who aren't Jedi. And they're not villains, but they work for the Republic or they're just citizens kind of trying their best. And so all of those kind of characters, I could just list off 1,000 of them because there's a lot of characters in the Republic.
It's true. And I'm glad that I have the High Republic character encyclopedia, because even when I'm reading the newer novels from Phase 3, I'm like, well, okay, wait, I think that's this person. And then sometimes even seeing a visual, although sometimes if you haven't seen art earlier, whatever your head canon is of what they look like, it's just kind of fun to see sort of how Lucasfilm processes it. But I want to change gears a little bit. This is more kind of I want to pick your brain, but in your opinion, it's quite prevalent in fandom and in discourse that there are a lot of flaws in the Jedi Order that lead to their downfall. Do you think some of those flaws of the Jedi Order and the prequel era are present in the era of the High Republic too?
I mean, I think yes, just because there are so many Jedi that, of course, you have Jedi that are kind of making maybe not the right calls or are very stubborn or think that they know better than everybody else. I think that the prequels, like when, like the first time we had a whole bunch of Jedi, like it was at a very kind of, they take place over a fairly large period of time, but like a lot of what we're seeing of them is like during like times of a crisis. Yes. And I think that that's really when you kind of get to know a lot of characters is how they respond to that. Like, are they reaching out to other people to get information, or are they trying to be really secretive and being like, oh, we can't let people know about this? Or, in the Phantom Menace, like the Jedi High Council is very much like, you did not see a Sith, Qui-Gon. Like, that's ridiculous. When you go back and watch that, like, it's so funny. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, if there was a Sith, we would know. Like that first kind of interaction with the Jedi High Council is so interesting when you go back to look at it, just because you're just like, come on, guys. Like, maybe there's some things that you might be a little bit, blinded to. But I think that, I think what's great about the Jedi and the High Republic is that they don't all agree with one another. They don't all see the Force in the same way. They don't have the same interests. I love Wreath and how he's like, lightsaber battles, like, like I could do without that. Like, I'd like a book. That's very relatable to me. And they make all kinds of mistakes. And that, like, no one wants a perfect character. Like, I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi is probably my favorite Jedi, but like the reason why I love him is because he messes up and, and then has to deal with it. Like, and that's just very, again, that's what happens is that, you can have the best of intentions, but sometimes, you might make the wrong call and then, chaos ensues. But, the chaos is what, that's kind of the core of the Star Wars stories is like, what do you do when, chaos happens?
Yeah, you need that conflict. This is such a perfect transition because you need conflict to create a good story, internal conflict as well as external. The Nihil are, I remember when I first heard about the Nihil, I was like, I was a little resistant. And then I read, Light of the Jedi. And I wasn't anymore because I understood what they are and why they are dangerous. But I like to hear from your perspective, what makes a Nihil so terrifying?
I think if I was in the High Republic era, like as a Jedi or as a citizen or like whatever, like generally what scares me are people who are unpredictable and who don't follow the rules and who don't seem to care about consequences. Like people who have nothing to lose and like, like they're just kind of wild cards. You don't know what to expect. I think that that's one of the things that like, you don't know what they're even after other than, like they might kill you. Like if you come in contact with them, you don't know where they are. You don't know where they're based. You don't know who their leader is. Like there's just so many unknowns about it. And I think that, the fear of the unknown is for me terrifying. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that is, terrifying to everyone, like from Jedi to Republic to citizen to farmer to whatever, like, is that no one really has a grasp of. It's not like, oh, like we know exactly like what their goal is, who their leader is. This is how we can stop them. This is where they live. Like there's none of that. It's just much more, it's just much more like what's out there in the dark. You can't control it and you can't prepare for it. It's like an earthquake. Like that's why I lived in Southern California for a long time. And, people would be like, oh, tornadoes and hurricanes and blah, 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 blah. And like a lot of times you don't know exactly when they're going to come, but a lot of times you do have a little bit of preparation for some of them. Certainly not a lot of tornadoes. That's probably a bad example, but like flooding and stuff like that, like all of those are terrifying to me because I've never lived in an area that like had a whole bunch of those. So to me, the unknown of that is terrifying. But for earthquakes, what was just terrifying is that you just, all of a sudden you wake up and there it is.
Right. Yeah, it's unpredictable is I think an excellent word for the Nihil, and plus they just have no respect for life, not only for another person's life, but it almost seems like for their own life. And it's when it's just that coldness. And I think, I mean, Star Wars is so full of villains with masks, right? Because it can hide. There's all kinds of great psychological stuff from Dr. Dre Letamendi and many others about masks and their impact. But then you throw the Nihil in there, and I feel like it adds a new layer because there's no force. There's just aggression and mean.
Yeah, well, I think that, when an enemy that has nothing to lose is terrifying because, you probably do have something to lose. Like, like whether it be your life or your family or a system of government or, something that you just don't want to lose. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that like when I first heard about like, oh, there's space pirates, they're raiders, like it, like when you just hear that, like, oh, like, like that's interesting. It's interesting that they're different, but like they're really it's interesting. And I think that like the more that, the Jedi and everyone learns about Marchion Ro and like Lorna D and stuff like that, honestly, the more you learn about it, the more you're like, maybe I'm a little even more scared now. Like now that I have the backstory, like maybe that actually didn't help now that I know a little bit more.
It's very true. Well, there's something else that I think can be daunting about creating and about writing in the world of Star Wars. For you, what are some of the more daunting sections to write about in the High Republic Character Encyclopedia?
Well, for me, the hardest part of the entire project is when I first came on, they asked me to help sort out the outline for the book and like who would be in it and like would they get like a full spread or a quarter page and like how are we going to organize it and stuff like that. And I worked with the editors at DK and obviously Lucasfilm to kind of sort that out. And that was by far the most challenging part of the project. When I came on, it was like just the beginning of phase 2 had come out. And obviously they give you, stuff early, which is great, obviously. But like, like I didn't have all of it, to go. And so everything phase 2 was harder than phase 1 because phase one, I'd already read all of it. I think that, maybe I was missing like one comic or like Edge of Balance, maybe I hadn't read before. I don't know. But like, it was like over 90% for sure. I had already like read it. And so it was just kind of like coming back to it and sorting it out. But phase 2, I think it was very similar to what my understanding that Cole Horton's experience was writing Star Wars timelines, because he did the High Republic era and he was writing Star Wars timelines as everything was coming out, as wave, 2 and 3 were coming out. And that's a whole different, that's a different thing than, like one of the books we worked on, which was like the regular, like live action, character encyclopedia. Like I worked mostly on The Rise of Skywalker and a little Mandalorian and like that had all come out. It was done like, and you knew what it was. Right. And then when you're writing things that are a little bit more fluid, and the story isn't done, that is much more challenging. But it was also like very, very fun. It was great to, I think that obviously Lucasfilm and DK wanted this to be a resource for fans, as phase 3 was developing. And I think that it's great that, the timing of it, I think worked out well. And I'm crossing my fingers that we get to do, Megan and I get to do an update at some point.
Oh, that would be cool. And there's going to be plenty for you to update. And I was thinking about that just from reading the beginning of phase 3. So when you're working on these things, I remember I talked about this a lot when the Star Wars book came out. For me, my answer to this question I haven't said yet was Leia. But what aspect of the High Republic, whether it be characters or storylines or events, did you learn to appreciate or understand more about while writing and reflecting upon this book?
I think for this one, part of the challenge was when you were writing a character, pretty much like this wasn't every single character, but it was the vast majority of all the characters, whether it was a big character or whether it was a small character. You weren't just looking at one book. You weren't just looking at one comic or even one comic series. You really had to be like, okay, well, they appear in this adult novel and that YA novel and these 2, comic series. And then they're also in that audio drama, and trying to kind of piece all of that together and to really see how so many different authors wrote the character in a way that all seemed true to that character, which I don't think is easy, like at all. And, sometimes even when a character would pop up only for a brief time, like sometimes that was still like super important. It would kind of give you, with the character encyclopedia, you're really going for kind of like, how can I tell this character apart from other characters? Why should I care about them? What are their connections with other characters in the storyline? You're really looking for those details that like a reader can latch on to be like, okay, no, I know who this is. Like, that's why, okay, when you're, because I'm not going to win Star Wars trivia. Like, I write a lot of Star Wars reference books. I'm not winning any Star Wars trivia things because I'm like, it's too much information. It all mushes around, and then I can't keep the right thing. Like, that's not my skill set. But but I do I really enjoy projects where I can dive deep into individual characters or individual groups and really talk about why is this weird little pilot of this ship, like, why should you know and care about them? Who's this weird little guy? And that's what was so fun about the High Republic, this project, is that it really allowed us to give some love to some of the smaller characters, which are just delightful, but aren't gonna ever, they're not going to make anyone's top. Well, maybe they'll make someone's top 10 list. But like, if you're talking about like the 10 biggest characters, you're never going to make that list. But like, this book really allowed Megan and I to really highlight some of the weird and wonderful background characters.
Wait, hearing you say that reminds me of several conversations we had when we wrote the Character Encyclopedia updated and expanded edition. How do you invest in characters that are like on the screen for like a nanosecond, or that are just so small in the context of a particular novel or a comic, but you have to kind of give them a little bit of oomph, or like kind of put a stepping stool on so that they can reach up and stand, with Marchion Ro and Stellan Gios and all these other amazing characters. And I think, even if I wasn't your friend, I think you do a terrific job with that. I really do. Yeah.
I think it's challenging because, as it's a reference book. Like, it's not like Time for Amy and Megan to make up stuff book. Right. Like, the annotations are the kind of the craziness of these projects where sometimes you get to throw something and you're like, let me see if I can get this to slide by, But, sometimes you're really kind of being like, okay, well, what species is this character? Like, would this make sense? Like, if you're because sometimes the characters are so small that it is really hard to talk about them. And you're like, well, and you always flag this, you're like, maybe I made this up a little bit, but like, I think I don't think that anything contradicts it. And I don't think it's boxing any creative in a way, like, could we say that this, like, that's kind of like where you draw that fine line. But it is, sometimes it is really, challenging where you're just like, okay, like, I know one thing about you, but I need to write 100 words about you. So like, what are we going to do? And I think the connections between, who are they connected to? Who do they talk to the most? What is their attitude? Like, are they sharp and witty? Are they sarcastic? Are they grumpy? Like, those are the kind of things that, that I always like when I hear that someone is kind of, when I hear adjectives used like that always kind of helps. If I have forgotten a story, it helps, like, oh yeah, no, now it's coming back.
Yeah, so like an aspect of sort of what makes them tick or makes them stand out. Well, let's compare writing the High Republic Character Encyclopedia to other projects you have worked on, and what made this one stand out for you. Is it just as simple as it's a new timeline? I feel like there's more to it, probably.
Well, I think that, part of it was just that it was the first character, and it's like there had been other reference books for the High Republic. A couple of them had come out, but this was the first one that was character centric and also kind of like trying to. I love that Lucasfilm let us have, page, like a spread about like Starlight Beacon and the convocation of the Force, and like, who are the Pathfinders? Like, let's talk a little bit about that, just to kind of, and there was a timeline at the beginning of the book, which was very funny because one of the editors, the main editor for this book, also worked on timelines, and we're like, oh, look at that, we're doing another timeline.
I must say I did giggle when I saw that page.
Yeah, no, it's just very funny, but like, I think it's very helpful, like, to have that. Like, I think that it, I think it crosses the line a little bit between character encyclopedia and like, it has some stuff that like, you might see in a, like, more of a visual dictionary or like, something like a guide in that. And I think that that's really helpful because for fans who know and love these stories, or for fans who are just kind of getting into them, going beyond the characters and really trying to give a greater picture of stuff and giving people like, highlight points of like, these are the big, these are the big areas. Or I love that, like, they, and I wasn't a part of this part of the book, like that there's a list of all of the stories that these characters came from. And, like, this character is in phase 1 and phase 3. This one's in all 3 phases. This one's just in this phase. This is where their character debuted. Like, I just think that like there's so much information packed in this book. I was really, really pleased about that. But I have developed a bizarre kind of niche of like writing concisely about Star Wars. And so like I was very happy anytime I got a character who had a full spread, because I was like, yes, like we can really like dig in now.
It's a great challenge, isn't it? Because you want to synthesize the key ingredients, but you also want to kind of give it its own uniqueness too.
Yeah.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
So here's something I'm interested in, and I'm sure our Coffee with Kenobi listeners are as well. What can you share about what you have coming out in the future that you're allowed to say?
Sure. Well, I have 2 things that are coming out this year. One of them is what you mentioned, the Star Wars Encyclopedia, which was a huge endeavor, like a bigger team than even Star Wars Timelines. And so that's a very fun one. Like there's a couple new authors. There's a whole bunch of authors I've like been excited to work with. And so that was a really, very excited about that. It's almost 450 pages, which is just absurd. Like it's just huge. It's going to be a heavy one. So I'm very excited about that. And that comes out, I believe it's scheduled now for September 17th.
Yep.
And then the other book that I have coming out is a book between National Geographic and Lucasfilm that is part of the National Geographic Weird But True series, which is, it has a really long name and I'm not going to be able to come up with it, but like, it's a Weird But True, 300 Star Wars facts. It's part of that series. And that was a really amazing project to be a part of because, National Geographic is obviously like crazy, like to work with. And then the Weird But True series, like if you have a kid or if you spend any time in a children's library, like part of the library, like those books are epic. Like everyone has them, like they're super fun to look through, whether you're a child or an adult. And just working with the National Geographic team about that, like that was it was really a great challenge to write. That was another like concise, like that's like a 24 word or, less fact, like the word count is very, important in that one. But it was really, really great to learn kind of their style and how that meshes with the Lucasfilm style and how those two huge publishing, like, two huge places, combined. And I'm very excited to see the finished project because the designers of that series are like every single spread is amazing. And so just the few that I've seen just like bring me so much joy. I mean, like they just, they make any fact look better just because they make the visuals of that like just look amazing.
Isn't it cool that you brought that up? Because just before we recorded tonight, Mason has one that he's looking at is sports facts. So he's like constantly quoting things. Hey, Dad, did you know about this? Did you know about this? So in it, and I knew I was about to talk to you. So how just so wonderfully serendipitous.
Yeah, no, I think that, those books are really, really special to me. Like like they were like, oh, do you want me to send you a couple, books? I'm like, well, that would be great. But I already have some like right over there, like, right in my like library over here. So I'm really, and that comes out, I believe, in August.
That sounds right.
Those are the 2 things, that I can talk about right now. And I'm very excited for both of them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If people don't know, where can they reach out to you online if they want to say hello or ask you about your great books?
Sure. So I am on most social media, just my name at Amy Richau. I go back and forth as to what social media I'm using. Like, I'm not really picking one or like choosing, so you can find me on most of them there. But, like most people, I'm kind of waiting for one to rise above the rest.
Well, thank you, Amy, so much for coming back on the show. Love to have you on anytime.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.